latest edition of Weather or Not. I'm Meteorologist Brian Karstens. Thanks so much for joining us for today's program. A lot on the agenda today. I know the weather pattern is pretty quiet, but we're going to keep things busy because we've got a lot of things that we can look at when it comes to weather. Even though the forecast is kind of in the 80s a lot of days, I like to dig into some details on days like this. And so a couple of things that we'll dive into today. First of all, the weekend forecast. We got to look at that. Also, the causes of the dry and warm pattern. For some of us, this 7-day forecast is going to be not a great thing when you're dry. I know locally around Sioux Falls, there are some spots that are very, very dry, including my house, so I kind of tend to think about that. But for others of you, it is not dry. And in fact, it might be surprising to look at the drought monitor update that came in earlier on Thursday morning. So we're going to look at that, plus the long-range forecast. Scott has started that trend, so I'm not going to deny you of that. We are going to look at those details coming up again a little later on in the program. First of all, we acknowledge the obvious, the dry weather, clear skies, temperatures in the 80s. This is a look at Futurecast as we end this Thursday and kick off Friday and into the weekend. And you can see the wind primarily starting to change more to a southerly direction for your Friday. And as a result of that, it's even going to amplify our temperature even more. We are anticipating a cold front to arrive into central South Dakota. And, of course, that's going to take us into Friday afternoon. Northwest winds, Rapid City tomorrow. And then this cold front, what is it going to do? Not much. Very little rain evidence here. And for the most part, I would classify this system as washing out as it moves to the south. Sioux Falls goes from mid-80s to right around 80 on Saturday afternoon. So, no, that is not a huge change in the weather. I know. And so it begs the question, when will the weather begin to change? Well, coming up, we're going to take a look at next week and all the bigger pieces to the weather pattern as we continue on Whether or Not. Stay with us. Welcome back. I'm meteorologist Brian Karstens. Well, on today's program, we're talking about the big picture, the weather, and what an interesting way to end September. Last year, we had warm, very dry weather, kind of led up to what set the tone for the rest of the fall. That's an interesting discussion point, isn't it? So as we begin this segment, let's bring up the big map across the country, kind of see where we fit into all of this. And obviously, we've had our wet spells for some of us, not everybody. Sioux Falls area, it is way below normal. We're sitting right now at 22 hundredths of rain for the month. We should be way above that. We're about 2 inches below normal. Of course, that's the airport. You look at some parts of town, it is much different. Southwest Sioux Falls had that one big rainstorm, and that can make a big difference on a monthly rain total. But as we watch what's next and what's coming our direction, high pressure ridge right over the midsection of the country, that's going to shield us from any meaningful chance of rain. I just don't see that coming. What we do see, however, is a weak cold front for Saturday. Trims us a few degrees. It's so unimpactful here that even on this map, it really doesn't show up. It's a very weak trough in the parts of southern Canada. Next week, though, we get into Sunday and Monday, and keep watching this. I'll be kind of curious to see what happens here with this particular outlook, because as of right now, high pressure, which you can see is right here near St. Louis, Missouri, and sprawled out even into the Great Lakes. This is forecast to kind of anchor here, and then over time, it'll settle maybe just a little bit farther north. I'll kind of play this out for you so you can see that. But at the same time, there's some tropical weather going on, and that's something we're going to have to acknowledge, because I do think that as we go into this forecast early next week, depending on what happens here with the progression of these systems. Now, you're seeing a little displacement here on the precipitation versus the center part of the storm. The reason for that, there's two different versions of the European model being fed in here. And maybe at the end of the day, that illustrates some of the uncertainty on that. So once we start getting a better idea of how that's all going to behave, then we'll know more about the pattern that does affect us. But obviously, a lot of times, if we look at historical records, we know that typically, at least for our part of the country, we will continue to see, I think, more of the same. When you get into a blocking pattern like that, the weather just doesn't change a whole lot. So it means more 80s and probably a couple of 90s could show up. Interesting to see the dew point forecast. Now, you're probably asking, well, why are we talking about dew point? It's not humid outside. And that is precisely the reason why I wanted to bring this up, because it's just the opposite. If you look at the numbers on Friday afternoon, what do you notice here? First of all, Rapid City, that's kind of a low number, 38. Pierre, 53, a little bit higher. And then, well, why is Sioux Falls lower? Well, let's remember the drought, or I shouldn't say drought, but abnormally dry conditions that have kind of developed around Sioux Falls. Lack of rain the last month. Well, that contributes to some of the low-level mixing, and the lack of moisture in the air makes a difference. And it's, by the way, fully connected to the fact that we're going to warm more than probably the neighbors around us. So just keep watching that. Now, I'm not advertising maybe this extreme, but Sioux Falls lower again on Saturday. Sunday, we're one of the lower numbers. Now, Rapid, I can expect to see that, but I think it is significant. Even next week, there's just not a huge amount of moisture pushing into this pattern yet. So it may start to feel a little bit more humid in spots next week as we go along. And it's also interesting the number of days with a south wind. It's, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Could we go even Thursday of next week? That's a lot of days in a row of the same weather. So it's a classic block. That's what we see. Speaking of the wind, let's dial into some numbers here. Okay, this is the beginning of the forecast. And so to finish out today and starting off on Friday, the wind's not too strong, but they will be a little bit more steady on Friday afternoon. South winds 15 to 25. Mitchell, I see plenty of evidence to support Rapid City picking up a northwest wind in the afternoon. That's this washed out cold front that comes barreling through, and it gets us into Saturday. Yeah, it doesn't really make a huge difference on wind numbers, not any major developments, but it's going to feel a little bit cooler, highs in the 70s. And then as we go into the forecast for Sunday, that south wind starts to pick up. And let's see what Monday brings, and that's got even more wind across the central and south central. Could we go over 30 miles an hour? Probably. More that pattern blocks, the better the odds are that we're going to have more wind. What are you going to be doing? Well, you can't let the systems move down pike, so basically everything gets stopped, sandwiches together. That increases the pressure gradient, that increases the wind, and that's what we end up with is warm, dry weather for a few days. Could change after the 7th day, but it's just not in any hurry. So that's the main point we wanted to drive home here as we look at that pattern, if you will, across the upper Midwest and Northern Plains. So now that we know that, coming up next, we're going to take a little closer look at what is the latest on the drought monitor. We got a couple of new updates with that. And, of course, we got to take a look at that long-range forecast. Scott always promises that. That's the latest here for Whether or Not in this segment. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Whether or Not. I'm Meteorologist Brian Karstens. So we're going to talk this segment a little bit more about moisture trends. Now, it is a Thursday, so on Thursdays we get the drought monitor update. So I have to begin with a couple of comments. First of all, for some of you, the drought monitor is a non-issue, and I totally understand that. It really depends on where you're watching us, what perspective you have on the recent moisture. Now this, I know at the top of the graphic, I meant to change this. This is actually the last 30 days, so my apologies there. But I wanted to get across the 30-day rainfall map. And in particular, when we look at that on television, a lot of times we'll show this. Okay, so this gives you another, vantage point, different colors, but same idea. Excessively wet compared to normal. In the darkest blue counties that would take us from Pierre to Mobridge, north and west. We know that story's out there. We've talked about that a lot. The Sioux Falls vicinity is running deficits, and the new drought monitor, which came out about 7:30 this morning, has some interesting little pieces here. Let me see if I can do this for a moment. I'll actually take us to some zoomed in features. So Sioux Falls is right on the edge of this little dry pocket. Now, if you're in Lenox, Canton, locally, parts of Lincoln County, Turner County, yeah, you know what I mean. It's dry. There's not any water running out of tile lines. Farmers are out harvesting now. It's very dry, so the dry down is going to continue. Rainfall at this time obviously doesn't make a difference on that. It will help us with fire danger. We're going to have to talk about that story if we don't start getting more rain. And a 7-day forecast with 80s to near 90-degree levels. It dries out. Now, this drought over here, when we look at Tripp County, we look at Chamberlain, this is long-term drought. So this has been shrinking. And so different perspective. We got one that's developing farther east over here, and then we have the one that's shrinking and has been on a better path, although now we've kind of stopped that, haven't we? We're not going to get any wetter anytime soon in the South Central. And just for fun, let me show you the larger map here. Yeah, you got some long-term drought, western Nebraska. Look at Kansas. It's been wet. Missouri, though, is dry, and so is Illinois. Look at all of that drought now. We've got moderate to severe drought, southern Illinois, all the way into northeastern Indiana, northern portions of the Ohio River Valley. So that's an interesting way to start off the fall season across the Corn Belt. But, of course, the long-term drought, too, is a much bigger story in the Intermountain West. Let's see where that goes as we head into fall. We need some troughs in the west and picking up bigger storm systems there to correct that. And so far, that has not happened lately. We've had one low that kind of dropped through Colorado here a couple of days ago, brought some snow west of Denver. But, again, it kind of parked out right here in Kansas, where it's been raining much of the summer. So that gives you a little bit of a bird's eye perspective on that. It's an interesting story. I think drought obviously can come back at us. It's not usually in, big time mode changes. When you get to October, we reset the water calendar this time of the year. Crops aren't growing. They're pretty much done now. So water getting into October helps us to replenish some of the subsoil. But for some of you watching us, you've got the exact opposite issue. It's too wet. We got water everywhere. So, again, a variable story across KELOLAND. Okay, well, that recaps that subject. Coming up next, we are going to look at the long-range picture. Yeah, that snow map that Scott likes to show. We'll see what it says today. That's coming up next. Stay with us. Welcome back to Whether or Not. I'm meteorologist Brian Karstens. Well, time now for the promised segment here. We always like to look at the long-range picture. We have different ways to do that. And so today I'll show you a couple of new things that I don't always get to, but, we might as well just chat about a little bit. So we've talked about temperatures being above normal, okay? And this map here, this is the AI version of the European model. So this is the artificial intelligence version, which is an interesting way to compute weather. It looks backwards in time. It looks at historical records. It looks at past data, comes up with projections for the future. Does a pretty good job, too. It's as fully accurate as the deterministic or the version that we traditionally use. In fact, arguably, a little even more accurate. But what does it say for us, at least going into this last part of September? Well, more days than not, the red, the gray, the charcoal colors, look at that. We've talked about Monday a few times on the KELOLAND This Morning program. I mentioned our high 88. Going high is 88 for Sioux Falls. The record high would be 90. Boy, you look at that, you've got to start wondering if that's going to be a record-setting day there. That's Monday afternoon. Now, I promised to go long range here, so I'm going to keep moving along. This is early October, first couple days of the month. Not a lot different, is it? A little troughing in the northwest. Now, of course, look at the Carolinas. Do you see that? You got your cooling there in response to some of this tropical weather. So the question is, does this hang up? Does this block? Does it run into that? Well, probably for a little while. We'll see how fast that can move along. But isn't this interesting? And here, I'm going to do this for a moment because I feel like we need to get a little bit closer in on the particulars. So let's zoom in on the central region of the country right there. Now, I know the numbers are maybe a little hard to read, but those are anomalies. That tells you how many degrees above normal we are. Those are all in the 20s, 20 to 25 degrees above average for the 6th of October. Now, that's just a day on the calendar. That could change a little bit between now and then. But there is a little bit of an interesting feature there, isn't there? By the 7th of October, looks like we got a front. Maybe we've got some hints here of some precipitation. It's been kind of hinting at that. I'm not ready to go there yet on all this, big chance of rainfall. But just because we can show the trend line there, see how that does blossom some more rain across parts of Iowa, Nebraska, Minnesota at the end of the first week of October. So there is something there. Now, that's one way to look at things. Now, what we're going to do next is we're going to look at this map, and I'm going to bring us back out. We're going to look at the big picture across North America. So here we go. Temperatures. Let's look at that first of all. This is a 7-day rolling average. So it starts off the gate. Yep, everything you expected to see. Nothing new there. Pretty warm. Then we go through time, and what do we see here? Well, a little more evidence of some troughing across the Pacific Northwest. Now, it takes us a long ways out into October. So any interesting items there? Well, a little troughing here across the East Coast. And again, that's the average. Now, there's a little bit more that we can dial into here if we look at the particulars. And I love to show this because Scott would probably say too, let's see where snow can fall the next month. See how Canada fills in? I think the last time that I filled in solo for Scott, we talked about this picture. You remember that conversation about tracking snow depth across the northern hemisphere? This is October snow is one of the factors that goes into the winter forecast. Now, this is a compilation. This is a 46-day snowfall map across the northern hemisphere. So, yes, it paints out a lot of snow, doesn't it? It's kind of an interesting map. Now, let's look at Canada. You know, we're in this nice, warm, extended summer. You think, oh, it could just last forever, right? Well, then we know better, right? It's not going to last forever, and it will change. And that's certainly a lot of hefty snow over segments of October in Canada. So that's brewing the cold. You might be asking yourself, well, is that above normal, below normal? Well, I don't have a number on that for you, but if I just go back and forth on this animation from the 2nd to the 4th week of October, there's certainly more than just one storm up here. I mean, it's not like it's just one and done. So, we've been living off of the fact that the prairies of Canada have been warm. They've been receiving mild Pacific air. So when those things start to change, our weather pattern here at home also begins to change. Now, this is the upper air pattern. Let me reset this a little bit for us here. So just for fun, we're going to go backwards in time. So there's where we are now. All this warmth, all these ridges here across the middle section of the country. Now, if I was forecasting colder weather, I'd be looking for some sort of a block here in Canada that's going to unleash that. And there's some evidence of a couple of good fronts there across New England. Again, I'm going back and forth about the middle of October. And then right here, this is a little bit more interesting. It tends to kind of drop the polar jet stream into the central part of the country, mid-October. Kind of is a wavy pattern still, so it's probably, to me, signaling just, a little more of a correction, a little bit more waviness to the pattern, and then we'll wait and see. But a lot of days, if we're in a wet or a westerly flow like that, just to take a look at the precipitation that it kicks out during that time, see that? That's not a wet pattern for us, is it? No. In fact, just the opposite. If you really want to dial in there, look at that. South Dakota, Minnesota, Iowa, all the way to Texas, that is actually drier than normal in the extended forecast. And so if that persists, well, usually what I see in a pattern like that is our ability to fluctuate. We can go back and forth. We can open the door to some cold fronts, but at the same time, you'll have some resilience in that pattern too, as it can easily warm up again. So interesting. I always love to see the change of the season. So we acknowledge the snow to the north, not here in KELOLAND, but it's going to be eventually the change of the season. So we'll take, I guess we'll have to, the extended summer that continues into the weekend. Well, we're out of time for today's program, but we thank you for watching. And of course, as always, we've got more information at your fingertips, KELOLAND.com. Great resource as always. We love to have you check out all of our weather information, our daily forecasts. Scott will be gone again tomorrow, so you'll see me again for our next edition of Whether or Not. Have a great day.